Let's start introducing the panelists. The first one, Matthew, if you could give a short introduction.
Sure, yeah, thanks. Yeah, my name is Dr. Matthew Merritt. I am a school principal currently in Bangkok, Thailand at international school here in Bangkok. It is 4:40 in the morning, and so that explains the bags under the eyes. I'm very excited to be part of this group, and I think the perspective that I bring is I've been an international school educator for over 20 years now, and mainly based here in Asia. Went from being a classroom teacher into leadership, and have just finished my dissertation on using technology in learning environments to help kids with specifically their student agency level of engagement, and how that technology then directly affects the learning. And I know that this summit is about the future of learning, and so that's kind of the perspective that I'm bringing to the panel.
Thank you, and Matt.
Hello, Matt Wisner. I work at Amazon in our Seattle office. I've worked at Amazon for about 10 years. I currently lead a program called Amazon Future Engineer, which is about making sure all students have access to high quality computer science education as its important relationship to economic mobility, whether they work at Amazon or not, or become a software engineer or not. And we work a lot between obviously private and public, but with public being nonprofits, K-12 school systems, and post-secondary school systems.
Well, my name is Dr. David Cillay. I'm the Vice President for Academic Outreach and Innovation and Chancellor of our Global Campus at Washington State University. My primary portfolio is to help faculty be successful in technology-mediated learning environments, both in a credit-bearing or degree-granting sense, as well as our professional and continuing education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And we actually have seen the first question come in from Joel Peterson. He asked, what global firms tend to provide the most support to public-private partnerships, and in what form? So I think that can relay to our first question, which is, we just described where your role falls in public-private partnerships. Actually, that's the unique differentiator about this panel, is how we approach innovation and solutions is through public-private partnerships. And Matthew, Matt, and Dave each have a different role in it. So I think that we could speak to the panel from each role. So what are you hoping to achieve through public-private partnerships, and why did you choose this method? And we can start with Matt here.
Okay, I think for me, it's so at Amazon, we have this customer affinity, and we have similar customer affinity with this program, and the customer being educators and students. And for us, it's really a bridge back to that customer. So if the educators we're typically interfacing with, bless them, are K-12 educators that are going to some kind of boot camp of professional development to learn computer science, usually don't have a computer science degree or coded before. And you can imagine what kind of bridge is needed then to get the students to understanding what that's like in post-secondary, and let alone a job. So we want to work with these different kind of public institutions, universities, all the way down to the K-12 school system to make that bridge where we're on the other side potentially with jobs and technology that they can interface with and engage with. And for me, that's the important part. And that's what we're good at certain things, and these public partners are good at other things, and let's get together to make that bridge for the student. So should they wish to pursue these careers in technology, we're synced all the way through and providing that kind of pathing for them.
Right, and Matt, I remember when we spoke last time, there were certain areas that the private sector, like Amazon in your case, that have strengths in, and before you struck up a public-private partnership, you wanted to go directly into sending your best engineers or whatnot to these students directly, but you did find a different challenge, right? Could you go a little bit deeper into some of the challenges that arise that private companies in their own cannot, cannot solve, and how you incorporated public-private partnerships to match that challenge?
Yes, I think the sage wisdom we got was teachers should be teaching students. Software engineers may be not the best teachers of students. Teachers have gone through the training and the experience and understand what's needed to effectively reach and teach a student. So again, I think it harkens back to let's all do what we're good at. And for us, we didn't want to reinvent teaching in some way or come out as education experts where we may not be, and we wanted to really rely on that expertise, but then add value. So thinking about, okay, where do we add value in this picture? And that came up in the form of like technologists. So yeah, we can still pair technologists with classrooms and teachers. And that's more we found in the form of inspiration. Like, here's what my journey was like, and here's how I got to where I'm at. And you could start to, a student and educator can start to imagine that. And then the second part is technology. So we've given, for example, we support over 2,000 classrooms across the US, 2,000 high school classrooms with computer science courses. They all have access to Amazon Web Services to build projects, which I really think really enhances the experience. And then for like, now your educator also knows about Amazon Web Services. It's kind of an industry grade cloud computing career. That's what everybody uses. So it starts to, I think, get that bridge again between private, Amazon on one side, educator and student.
And Matthew, I know that your dissertation, your PhD, was specifically around this issue, right? What are how to increase engagement through technology, but not only through technology, but the teacher aspect of it. So Matthew, could you respond to that? And then Dave, could you follow up?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rich. Yeah, so I'd mentioned to the other panelists that kind of being here in Southeast Asia, we have a number of kind of companies that are based here that often really create partnerships pretty easily. There's a lot of tech companies, and Matt can probably speak to this, that really see value, I think, in getting involved in education, and there's that feeling that you're making a difference by helping kind of that next generation out, and either they go into the tech industry or you help them become better learners. And we really benefit from that as being an international school over here, kind of being close to where a lot of these companies operate. But what we have found is that really that engagement, it takes hold when the company is willing to kind of see that infusion of technology through. Matt alluded to it, is teachers know how to teach, but the flip side of that is they don't tend to be really kind of tech savvy either. Our kids are, right? Our K-12 kids are. They eat it up, and they're motivated, and the technology and the partnerships with companies outside is really important. They get a view kind of how their life's going to be, and what business is going to be like. Often that the barrier there is the teacher. And so if we can get partnerships where there is an investment of human capital, and we get the training, and we get people on our campus that are showing us how these things work, and the teacher feels comfortable not only using it, but also using it to teach, they have a much greater impact on the learning environment for our kids. And so yeah, it's really interesting having recently finished my research on this topic, and really almost getting teachers out of the way, and letting that tech and letting those wonders and that motivation really get straight to the students. It's really important that that investment is both with the human capital, and we capitalize on how motivating that is for our learners.
Yeah, so I think building on what Matthew mentioned, you know, if I think back on some successful public-private partnerships and thinking about the companies that are the most supportive, what we've found, it's the companies that share a common goal, an outcome, and really focusing on what the outcome of the partnership is going to be, and building that vision together, bringing something to an individual company or companies. We've had success, but it's really making that connection and building that relationship and understanding, all right, here's our outcome, this is what we're going to accomplish, and ensuring that we resource that successful outcome appropriately. Who's responsible for what, and how do we get there as a partner? So I'll stop there, but agree with both Matt and Matthew.
Yeah, and so, you know, Joel Peterson asked in the beginning, what global firms tend to provide the most support to public-private partnerships, and in what form? So could you talk, could each of you, you know, talk about in your careers, where have you seen the best public-private partnerships stem from, and in what use cases were there? And on the flip side, what were some use cases where public-private partnerships were not the best solution, or, you know, there definitely were some kinks that could not be worked out?
So one of the successful partnerships that we've had is with Boeing. We have the Boeing Scholars Program, where Boeing funds students to participate in really relationship building with the company. They come in and get hands-on experience. They work directly with an executive. They get scholarship money, and then ultimately those individuals who've participated in that oftentimes end up serving in long-term internships and are employed by the company at the end of their time at WSU. And again, it comes down to, I think, a shared outcome. We want to graduate students who are going to be successful, who have solid skills, knowledge, and abilities. Boeing wants to have graduates who have solid skills, knowledge, and abilities coming to their company. And so it's you know, it's cliche, but it's a win-win. And those really are those partnerships that I found to be very successful. In terms of the ones that aren't, I'm not going to mention specific names, but I'll take the counter approach to the Boeing Scholars Fund. It's those programs where one of the partners has come with an idea and sometimes money, and then there's not that shared vision in the outcome. And usually when the money runs out, so does the partnership.
Matthew?
Yeah, sure. The point that Dave makes about a shared vision is so very true. And it's usually when we are looking at tech or looking at something new, it's one of the first questions that we ask as a school. And so it's such a good point. I will start with the positive. I think here in Asia, Apple's presence and their Apple for Education is really what they've done. Is they've approached it as not just providing tech at a discount for our students and for our schools, but also really taking the time to work with our teachers. Our teachers jump at the chance to go to some of their institutes, and they host them here regionally, and they bring teachers in and treat them well, and you know, set up that true kind of human connection and the partnership there. And we found that then kind of moves back into the classroom with much greater ease than, especially lately with COVID. We've had, again, I won't name companies either, but some that have just kind of, they've been trialing these software packages and different platforms trying to pre-package distance learning, right? So these platforms and these ways that we can better connect our kids without without, I think, really the pedagogy behind it, that's where we find kind of the least successful partnerships, is when they're trying to mass produce a package that isn't really tailored, I think, to our context and the needs of our kids at our school or in our district.
Matt?
Yeah, I agree with the co-build. And I think in addition to that, it's like partner together on two things you're uniquely good at. And so for ours, you know, within the umbrella of STEM education, there could be many things you tackle. But for us, computer science made more sense because of who we are and what we could bring to the table with that. And then, so I'm obviously biased, Amazon's doing stuff. But another one that comes to mind is a peer team of mine. The program's called Disaster Relief by Amazon. So who better to get disaster aid to places in need than Amazon, who knows how to pack a plane really quick, watch it take off, and get supplies very quickly to those areas of need. And so it's another area where I think we've done a good job at. There is some funding involved, but working collaboratively with the partners on the ground, understanding the needs of the folks there, and then utilizing something we're very good at to bring real value to the picture beyond just cash.
And I think Dave just got booted out here. He was mentioning some internet connection, so hopefully he's able to come back on. But let's get to oh, here he is. Welcome back, Dave. So we had a follow-up question from Joel. You know, he was mentioning that the challenge in matching the adoption pace between tech and academia. You know, he was mentioning that a 90, 180 day plan can get stretched out to 2 to 3 years in academia. And how do you manage that? Could each of you speak? You know, we can start from Dave here. So since you're back, but how can you speak to how there are different timelines that you're working with, or when certain objectives and timelines get stretched out? How do you manage that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a valid, that's a good question, and it's right on target. The pace is much different in higher education than it is in industry. It comes back to what I mentioned in your first question, Rich, is that it's really understanding the outcome, but matching the expectations of each partner and sticking to the timeline. So, and it may be that some relationships, the timeline's just too divergent, and that partnership isn't going to materialize. But going into it with each partner understanding what their expectations are, what they bring to the table, the resources needed to achieve that outcome, and that includes building out the timeline for development and implementation. And again, there are some partnerships because of that pace of work that don't come to fruition.
I can jump on there if that's all right, Rich. So yeah, just to kind of go back to actually my first answer as well, is that you know, I think when it's successful, however, in a tech group or you know, a company that wants to make an impression on education, if they think from that perspective, where we're in this for the long haul, and it isn't going to be a quick kind of in and out and make the profit and go, that's kind of how schools work. You know, as Joel mentioned, the timelines can be a lot longer in schools, and I would say that probably you know, K-12 education might even be slower than higher ed, in that our actual educators are well trained at working with young learners, but not necessarily with tech. And you know, I mentioned Apple before, and I think one of the reasons why it was particularly successful, or has been here, is that our teachers were worked into a system with other people in other industries. So they were being trained alongside of, you know, people that were in for tech in other industries, not just education. And I think that really helped kind of motivate teachers that would go to these locations, get the training on the tech, and then bring that back to their classrooms. So it's almost like building systems of training and again, that human connection that are sustainable. And they've been around for a while, and these training centers or these sessions that they set up have been sustained and are stable. And I think that really helps the school feel good about investing in it.
Yeah, this was a learning we had. There's no productive speed dating situation with education. So I really like 1 year situations, just the school year goes, at least in America, goes over 2 calendar years. So like if you're trying to get something done in a year, it doesn't work awesome. So we really try to look at 2-3 year multi-year partnerships when we enter. And to make moves in education, if you want them systemic and sustainable, it takes time. The systems are very large, and there's a lot of moving parts, and there's policies in play and things like that. The one thing I would say so we've learned on that end. We want to get into longer, more meaningful relationships, co-build. On the other end, I think we've maybe introduced or gotten more comfortable with these systems to fail fast. So let's get out there and break a few things, and as long as it's not the detriment of students, we learn faster that way and can get better products and services in front of those students, is something I think we've on the other side been met on, and something, the balance between the two, like the private and public partners.
Mm-hmm. And Matt, you spoke about this last time, where you provide a set of training solutions and training services for these educators, so that they can be great facilitators of the technology services, right? Could you speak a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so as mentioned, so there's been this great growth in advanced placement computer science in America, but it's taking shape globally as well, and it's typically in this professional development. So usually the teacher's like in a lead learner situation year one, and we try to focus really on supporting them in every way possible. So this looks like we have some pretty good prepackaged curriculum coming off the shelf, working with, and it's mapping to standards. And then we have professional development we're supporting, and we have Amazon connection there, and having Amazonians drop in and give some perspective of you're doing this right now. Here's what it means when you're in the job. Here's how to bridge that gap. And then the third part we try to work with partners that also have some tutor support for classroom, because it's nothing more annoying in this context with I'm working on a coding problem, I'm stuck, teacher doesn't know what happens now. And just if you're working on something and you're excited about it, you're spending 80% of your time on implementation. We try to wipe out those scenarios so it's very easy for teacher, and they can really focus again on what they're good on, teaching and reaching the students, and they know a lot more about that. And we try to make things as easy as possible for them, and working with partners to do the same. And for example, we've had different partners for different needs of teachers. So for example, you have this teacher maybe in Metro Seattle area, good for them to potentially, the professional development model may be better for them to come in person, build community. But you also have teachers in rural Alaska, that's very difficult for them. And we have kind of online virtual models that work for them. So we really try to work backwards from that, the customer's perspective being the educator.
Mm-hmm. And so we have around 10 minutes left in this panel, and I think our next speaker is from Ideolab, and they're obviously a global design and innovation agency. And so kind of coming from that, I want to do a fun innovation exercise here. So one of the attendees, Joel Peterson, asked, based on the connectivity issues of Zoom today, for example, WebEx Teams, who's working with schools on the last mile of connectivity for students and teachers? And from this question, let's talk about COVID, right? I mean, obviously this has changed and disrupted the way teachers connect with students, and obviously it's affected public-private partnerships as well. Where do you see, given that this has happened and it's going to change the way students learn and the way teachers are able to connect with students, where do you see the biggest innovations happening in the education space? And what would be the most meaningful problems to work on? And perhaps this isn't all technology based, but it does require two forms, which is the public and the private sector, to come together to solve.
I think based upon the question, it's an issue of equity. We have individuals in this state that are unable to access education because of technology and connectivity. In terms of who's working on it, I know this is a local, state, and federal challenge, and all of those entities are working to address the issue. I don't know if it's going to be solved, but it is definitely being addressed. In terms of how COVID has affected the public-private partnerships, one example that I'd offer, given the devastation to the economy, one of the things that we did is we reached out to our alumni who have experienced success in their marketplace, various degrees granted, and really looked at how we might be able to get that knowledge, that expertise out. And so we ran a program called Cougs Work. Over the course of the summer. It was delivered every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday evening on individuals within a field that offered workforce development advice, how you move to a different career, how you become successful in that career. Very well received, and it was a great partnership. We partnered with individuals in industry, not necessarily the companies themselves, but those individuals to deliver that education to citizens of Washington.
No, go ahead, Matthew.
Okay, great. Yeah. So yeah, that is so central. Not just the whole aspect of access to the internet. We've found actually in our school that that connection with the student, obviously, that is learning from home. Thailand's been fortunately really great with COVID, so we're actually back in school face to face. Haven't had, knock wood, any cases in country for a few months, so still going through all the protocols, but things are in good shape. When our students were home, we found that it wasn't just connecting teachers to students, but it was also opening up resources and access for teachers while they were at home, and so the companies that were allowing us to connect to teaching resources and that type of thing, it became really important that we could access our seesaws and our other platforms that had become part of the classroom. One thing that I think is really important is I think when the students get up into that university level, it's a lot easier to keep them engaged. But with kids, about third grade and lower, we really have found that the loss of that instructional time, starting back from February through June, has really impacted our kids, our youngest learners, those that their attention span was just they were unable to sit and Zoom with the teacher for hours like our high school kids were or university kids were. So for us, I think kind of the next step is how do we keep those youngest learners who are growing at incredible rates with the reading and their numeracy and that type of thing? How do we keep them engaged when when we know their attention span is minutes and they're at home and their environment is completely different, each of them. We can't control it as educators. I think that's a massive challenge is how does this work for those youngest learners?
I think I got, I always remember this quote from a partner actually, which was, you don't, when you're reflecting back on your education and you're thinking about your favorite moments, you're not like, I remember this textbook, like it was so awesome. You say, I remember this teacher. And I think similar way, like, I don't think people are going to reflect back and say, this was a great laptop and I was connected the whole time and I had limited disruptions. I think they're going to be thinking in similar ways. So and then there's been articles, like kids used to like online and now they don't because they're on Zoom all day. So I think there's some balance to achieve it, and we may have been too far before, and now we're too far the other way, and we really need to find the middle here to, I think, have real success. And it was a big realization for us. For example, we've had very high adoption, but hearing back from educators is like, we got to strike a balance here. Nothing will replace the student putting their hands on a robot. Like you might be able to get to more students, but maybe not the most needy students. And then it also doesn't replace that experience. So I think it's important to think through that. And then in the systems and how they're operating, there's laptops flowing in from companies that make laptops and so on, but the way those perceived can be even different. Like, so I've heard in different workshops that like low-income students, for example, feel like these are being forced on them and they're kind of confused about how to use them and their parents aren't really up to speed. And then I think that's important. Like that, the laptop, I think we need to be careful and the dongle or whatever doesn't solve the problem. And there's a lot more pieces to equity that I think are super important. That's getting lifted up for sure. Like the problem's becoming much more acute. And I think it's good because it's leading to good conversations. Solution and ideal ways of going about it are still, I think, TBD.
Mm-hmm. And speaking to that, I think this would be the last question. Is given your experience in these different roles of public-private partnerships in education, what's that one nugget that you've learned recently that you'd want to pass on to the audience?
I'll go back to the example I used before with Coog's work. I don't know if it's a nugget, but having an ecosystem that allows you to tap into those sources is so essential as we look to
Excuse me, Dave?
of learning.
Dave, we lost you in the beginning.
Yes.
Could you repeat the answer, please? Thank you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was saying I said I went back to the example of Coog's work. I think one of the things that's going to guide us as we move forward is that there are so many diverse sources of knowledge and expertise. And I think the learning ecosystems of the future have to recognize that and be able to tap into those sources to be successful as we move into that future of not just higher education, but learning.
Go ahead, Matthew.
Matt, go ahead. I'm still thinking.
Yeah, mine, I think it's a similar, like the similar thing I've been chatting about, which is stay focused on what you're good at, is super important. And something even like we have a new program we launched recently called Class Chats, where we're sending Amazonians to chat with classrooms. And yeah, the original thinking like, oh, they could help mentor these students in computer science challenges and things. That wasn't really where the value was. It was more on like, just talk about what you do. Like talk about what you do at Amazon and the interesting problems you're solving and the technology where you work with. That will be more impactful than anything else. And we found that to be true. And that's coming through the feedback of students and educators like, oh, I didn't even know I didn't even know the job product manager existed. And now I didn't even know those, what they do at Amazon. I didn't know that was a thing. Now my mind's kind of opening. And while I'm learning computer science, maybe there's many different ways I can apply that isn't just, I'm coding in a corner somewhere. That I think is continue to try to stay anchored on that. So, and I think it leads to the best collaborations too with this regard to public-private partnerships.
Thanks, Matt. That triggered the answer I wanted to give. So thank you. Yeah, and just to to build on that, I think from the school's perspective, there's just so many cool tools out there, and the connection to things like our standards and all of that. It's much more thoughtful now than it was 5 or 10 years ago, and I think educators really appreciate that. Is that helps us make that connection between the tool and the classroom. But you know, as both the other panelists mentioned, to go back to a previous answer, it's the tools can be great, but it's that relationship, and it's the patience with that institution that that really make a difference. And if it's just about profit, or if it's just about testing something out, getting in and out of there, it won't have that kind of impact on learning that I think we're all kind of dedicated to.
Thank you. And we saw a last question come in, or a comment come in, that some of these private schools, as they lose their revenue due to COVID, what are some what kind of partnerships can help aid that? So thank you so much for your time today.